Good afternoon, my dear students. You are welcome to today's virtual class. My name is Dr. S.A. Sule, your course lecturer for EDU710. The title of the course is History of Education in Nigeria. This course has 10 study sessions, and they are all clearly outlined in your module. Today's discussion will be centered on the study session 1, which is the African Traditional or Indigenous Education, ATE, and Islamic Education in Nigeria. When you have carefully studied this session, you should be able to, 1, define the concepts of African Traditional Education and Islamic Education. 2, list and explain 4 goals of African Traditional Education and Islamic Education. 3, describe the contents of African Traditional Education. 4, identify the general characteristics or features of African Traditional and Islamic Education in Nigeria. And finally, you should be able to highlight and discuss any 4 contributions of Islamic education to world civilization. Introduction. African Traditional or Indigenous Education, ATE, and Islamic education were the 2 forms of education known to the Nigerian people before the advent of the Western education, which was brought to us through the activities of the early Christian missionaries in Nigeria in 1842. The concept of African Traditional or Indigenous Education, ATE. African Traditional or Indigenous Education is that traditional method or means through which the societal culture and cultural practices, norms, etc., are passed to the younger ones in the society without any foreign influence or interference. In Nigeria, it was the system of education in practice before the advent of Islamic and Western education. Therefore, African indigenous education is as old as man. The concept of Islamic education. Islamic education can simply be defined as any form of training provided for the learners either in the school system or elsewhere in line with the Islamic injunctions for the purpose of acquiring knowledge, skills, attitude, or any other behavioral characteristics considered beneficial to man and his physical and social environment. The goals of African Traditional Education. Generally, African Traditional Education is aimed at preserving the African cultural heritage or the cultural heritage of every community and transmitting same to the succeeding generation. Similarly, it is aimed at producing individuals who will fit properly into the society. But in specific terms, the goals of ATE include the following. 1, to develop the child's physical skill, to develop the child's character, to inculcate respect for elders and those in positions of authority, to develop intellectual skills, to acquire specific vocational training and develop a healthy attitude towards honest labor. Furthermore, to develop a sense of belonging and participate actively in family and community affairs. Furthermore, to understand, appreciate, and promote the cultural heritage of the community at large. What about the goals of the Islamic education? Islamic education basically has 5 fundamental goals. And these include: one, the development of the child's whole being in all ramifications. That is development of the child's whole being. Physically, that is physical development, mental development, aesthetic development, and spiritual development of the individual. Okay. Two, to equip the individual for progress and advancement of life. That is, life in this world and life in the world hereafter. To lead the followers out from darkness to light. To create citizens who are thinkers, scientists, artists, jurists, selfless workers, and scholars. And finally, to create in the individuals God's consciousness and maintaining link with Allah through prayers. Contents of ATE, African Traditional Education, has innumerable contents. The contents include the language of the environment. That is the first thing the child learns. Okay. And other contents include dressing pattern, religious practice or practices, cooking and eating habits, greeting system, marriage ceremonies, chieftaincy, coronation, burial ceremonies, tools for pursuing desirable economic activities, morality, the knowledge of the physical environment, social clubs and organizations, taboos, proverbs, etc., etc. All these are the contents embedded in the African traditional education. Methods used in African traditional education. There are different methods through which the elders teach the younger ones those different contents mentioned earlier. But fundamentally, there are two basic methods. Under these two basic methods include direct and indirect. Under direct method, we have the following: dialogue, instruction, reward, apprenticeship, participation, indoctrination, play, imitation, observation, oral literature, punishment, and social ceremonies. Then under indirect method, we have riddles and joke, we have proverbs, we have folktales, we have storytelling, we have oral literature. General characteristics or features of the African traditional education. One of the foremost characteristic of ATE is mother tongue being the language of the environment and being the medium of instruction. That is the medium used for instruction, for teaching, and for learning those contents earlier mentioned. Mother tongue, that is the language the child is born into, language of the environment, otherwise known as the mother tongue. Next is that some aspects of ATE are restrictive and secretive, as some experiences are solely reserved for certain class. Sometimes the men, sometimes the cult, leaders, sometimes the elderly, the very elderly, some experiences are solely, reserved for those classes of people. Other characteristics include it is a communal responsibility. Everyone is involved. There is no special or rigid time fixed for instruction. Instruction, learning, and teaching and learning can take place anywhere and at any time. indigenous education lacks documentation. It is also associated with illiteracy, as there is no form of reading and writing. It lacks certification. No certificate is awarded at the end of the study session, or in fact, there is no even study session. There is no duration, as it is a lifelong affair. There is no dropout case, as education is a lifelong affair. Okay, it lacks dynamism. It is conservative in nature, which means it does not encourage creativity or innovation. You are expected to repeat what had been taught to you, what had been invoked right from the time immemorial. Okay, you are not expected to change. So it does not give room for any form of creativity. It is not, it is conservative. Okay, it lacks designated venue for instruction. It is not planned. It is not organized. It is not planned. It is not organized as the formal education system we have today. Okay, so what are the characteristics of the Islamic education? The following are the characteristics of Islamic education. The schools are usually found in the mosque or teacher's parlor, veranda, or even under a tree. These are the characteristics of early Islamic education. 2, the school week usually starts on Saturday and ends on Wednesday. The curriculum is not uniform. Bells are not used to summon pupils. School fees are paid either in cash or kind. Foodstuffs such as grains, cooked food, clothes, or prayer mats are usually given to the teacher, otherwise known as malam, by the parents as compensation for teaching their children. Okay, what are the contributions of Islamic education towards civilization? A number of contributions were made by Islamic education towards world civilization. Among these include the following. 1, the Muslims established universities and institutions of higher learning in many cities like Baghdad, Timbuktu, Cairo, Cordova, many cities centuries before universities started emerging from the Western world. They made a lot of contributions in the field of art and architecture, as exemplified in their construction of mosques and palaces. They equally made a lot of advances in geometry. They invented algebra and developed trigonometric concepts such as sine, cosine, tangent, and cotangent. Muslims introduced the Arabic numerals in the field of mathematics, which we all use till date. In summary, in this study session 1, we have learned the concept of African traditional and Islamic education. We equally learned the goals of ATE and Islamic education, the contents and methods used in the teaching or training or learning of African traditional education. We equally learned the futures of African traditional education and Islamic education. Also, we learned the contributions of Islamic education to world civilization. Self-assessment questions that, that follow study session 1. There are 5 self-assessment questions there for you to attempt. And each question, tests the 5 learning outcomes earlier, highlighted. Study session 1. Study self-assessment question for study session 1 is define the concept of African traditional education and Islamic education. This test learning outcome 1.1. Self-assessment question 2. List and explain 4 goals each of the African traditional education and Islamic education. This test learning outcome 1.2. Self-assessment question 1.3. Describe the contents and methods used in African traditional education. This test learning outcome 1.3. Self-assessment question 1.4. Identify the general features or characteristics of African traditional and Islamic education in Nigeria. This test learning outcome 1.4. And finally, study self-assessment question 1.5. Highlight and discuss any 4 contributions of Islamic education to world civilization. This test learning outcome 1.5. Thank you, and God bless you all.